recording this computer, and this is the second session we have today about Canada 101. As always, we are very pleased to have OzielLaw here helping us with this specific workshop for startups. We are, very thankful with OzielLaw. They always help our startups to understand better how they can incorporate in Canada, even when they are not in Canada, depending of the cases and all that. So I'm going to pass the word to Alan to introduce his team, and then his team will start presenting. This video, again, is going to be recorded and pass it to all of those that are registered for Canada 101. Alan?
Amazing. Thank you so much, Miriam, and thank you as always to Latam. I say it every time, but I mean it every time. We're very, very grateful and humbled by the relationship that we have with you and with the Latam startups, and with the startup community, not just the Latin American startup community that you're bringing, but the international startup community that you're bringing to run through your program. We enjoy it every time. We enjoy talking with the startups. The session today that we're going to be doing is sort of an introductory session on how you can bring your business to Canada. Usually the first step is a determination of which we're gonna get into, a determination of why you're coming to Canada, and that leads you most often to an incorporation. So today we're going to talk about coming to Canada and incorporating in Canada. But I'm going to pass off the presentation to two of our lawyers who are actually both originally from Latin America. Tassiane Gosler was a Brazilian lawyer, and she's now here in Canada, acting as a lawyer in our firm. Maria Susana is an Ecuadorian lawyer, and she is also a lawyer at our firm. So I'm going to leave it to them to go through the topic, and then after our discussion, we'll have some questions and answers. So I'll leave it to you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. So, hi guys, my name is Tassiane, and we're gonna talk today, like Alan was mentioning before, about incorporating in Canada. So the way we structured our presentation, first we're gonna be talking about what is your purpose for doing business in Canada. This is something that will really guide you to understand what is the best way for you to incorporate your company here. Then we're going to be talking about the actual incorporation, how it works, what are the things that you need to keep in mind. And because we have this specialty of working with technology companies, we think that some of you relate to that as well. We're going to be talking about some of the things that you need to pay attention to after you incorporate your business, particularly for tech companies, but also for companies that are service-based and that are hiring employees in Canada. And finally, we have a 15-minute Q&A session that Alan is going to be present as well to go through any questions that you may have. If you have any questions during the meeting, I think we have a chat, and if it's specific to what we're talking about, we can discuss those as well. So getting started, like I said before, the first thing we need to keep in mind when incorporating a new business is what is your purpose for doing business in Canada? So from our experience dealing with foreign clients and international companies, we noticed that you could be either expanding an established foreign business that you have into the Canadian market, or you could be creating a new innovative business directly here in Canada. We also see the situation where you have a certain model, a business model in your home country, and you want to bring that to Canada, but it's not going to be specifically the same thing. Or you have a number of services that you offer and you're planning to bring only one of those to Canada to test. So in that case, it would be a mix between expanding an established business, because you're going to be probably using some intellectual property from your company in the foreign country in here in Canada, but you're also going to learn how the Canadian market will accept that, and you need to pay attention to all the considerations of a new business that is establishing here. In our case, we work a lot with startup companies, And when we're working with foreign clients, we see that sometimes you have businesses that have been established in their home countries for years, have a number of employees. But when you come here to Canada, you face the same challenges and also the same opportunities as startup companies. So we notice that foreign companies are usually in a very unique position, having challenges and advantages from both sides. Another thing that we take into account when we're thinking about the incorporation of your business here is if you have any intention to apply to an immigration program. We know that you had the earlier session with Bride Immigration on some of the immigration options that you have to come to Canada. You probably discussed intercompany transfer, you probably discussed startup visa. So those are factors that you need to take into consideration when you're planning to incorporate a business here, because the structure of the business needs to be compliant with what the immigration program requires. In the case of startup visa, for example, you may have discussed that, but now just bringing that to the context of the corporate matters and the incorporation of the business, you have the actual founders of the business, the applicants for immigration, having to be the owners of the company in Canada. So if you have a foreign company that is coming here, we may have to do some adjustments in terms of the structure of the business so that it is compliant with what you need under startup visa. When it's the case for intercompany transfer, it's a similar situation. We have to pay attention to what is the immigration program that works best for you. So we make sure that when we're structuring the company, it is compliant with what you need for that. So going back to those two options that we were discussing before, the first one is when you're expanding your business into the Canadian market. If this is the case for you, you mainly have two available options. You could be registering a Canadian branch in Canada, which is essentially an extension from your foreign company here in Canada, which authorizes you to operate here, but still under the company that you have abroad. Or you could be incorporating a Canadian subsidiary, which is a separate Canadian corporation that is controlled by the foreign company that you have. You can also have the situation where you're incorporating an affiliate business, which is more similar to a subsidiary because you have common ownership in the two companies. So the Canadian company will be owned by the same entities or individuals that own your foreign company. And that is the situation that is more appropriate for startup visa if you qualify and you plan to apply for that program. So when we present these options, usually the client or anyone we're talking to will want to know which one is the best. And pretty much like everything when you're talking to lawyers, there's no definitive answer. It really depends on your situation and what is best for your specific case. So in this next slide, I'm just going to talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages for each of those options. And then I can talk to you a little bit more about our experience and what have been some of the options that we suggested to our clients. So when we're talking about a branch, it's really an extension of the foreign business that you have. So the main advantage that you see is that you don't need to do an incorporation here in Canada. So it's a simple process that you do a registration of the business through a form that you file directly with the province that you're planning to operate. Another potential advantage is that you may be able to deduct Canadian taxes that you pay from foreign tax owning. But that one really depends on tax treaties between Canada and the country where your company is originally incorporated. Some of the disadvantages for the branch is that you need to designate a resident agent for service. So you have to hire someone that is going to be the resident agent for your company to receive service on your behalf. In some situations, you may have an additional branch profit tax, which is 25%. And because you don't have a different and separate entity in Canada, you cannot use a branch for the purposes of applying to startup visa or for an intercompany transfer. On the other hand, when we're thinking about a subsidiary, it's really a different corporation here in Canada that is controlled by your foreign company. And because of this, the advantage that you have is that the Canadian company will have your foreign company will have limited liability. So anything that happens here in Canada will not necessarily affect the company that you have abroad. So the assets of your foreign company, they're not necessarily exposed to any creditors that you have from your Canadian subsidiary. Another advantage is that you can apply for Canadian grants and subsidies with your Canadian subsidiary. If you are involved with research, innovation, technology, there are a number of benefits that you can apply here in Canada, but most of them will require that you have an entity set up here. And then some disadvantages of the subsidiary is that it's going to be more costly because you need to take the time to incorporate the company and actually set that up. And because now you have an entity here, you're going to have annual maintenance requirements that you need to pay attention to, and you need to observe all legal corporate requirements for this company. One question that we usually get asked is if you can start with a branch and then change to a subsidiary company later on. And the answer is yes, that is possible. That could be the case if you need to have a branch registered just to start operating with a specific client or for a specific business that you're doing in Canada. And then later on, you see the need to have the limited liability to access grants or for an immigration program, then you can simply incorporate the subsidiary later on. It's not an issue. And then in relation to how this subsidiary is created, most of our clients who establish a Canadian subsidiary in Canada, they incorporate a standard Canadian corporation. I know that in the US, you can choose between an LLC, C Corp. I know we have some people here from Latin America. You can choose between Sociedad Anónima, a limited company. You have those differences when you are creating an entity. But here in Canada, the most common form is the corporation. And if you are incorporating in a different province, there are other options that you have, but most of the times is going to be just a Canadian corporation. And another thing that usually comes to mind here when you're choosing the subsidiary is whether you need a minimum investment in this Canadian company. And the answer here is also no. Usually you're going to pay a nominal price for those shares that are being issued here in Canada. But it's not necessary to have a minimum investment at that moment. And then just one final thing here. For most of our clients, again, we choose the subsidiary company in conjunction with the client based on the limited liability and also the need to access grants here, to have equity in the Canadian company, and to receive investment here as well. Sorry, guys.
Thank you, T. Yeah, as my colleague T was mentioning, when coming into Canada, I'm just going to do a brief recap. You can do it through two different options. The first one that T already mentioned is to expand your business in the Canadian market by either registering a branch or incorporating a Canadian subsidiary or an affiliate. The second option is to create a new and innovative business in Canada. So here in the second part of the presentation, we're going to be talking about how to incorporate, where to incorporate, what are the benefits of incorporating, why should you incorporate. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see that either whether you're expanding by way of a subsidiary or an affiliate, or if you intend to create a new business here in Canada, you must incorporate. So if we go to the benefits of incorporating, we're going to find some in here. And of course, there are more benefits to incorporating, but I'll briefly touch in these ones here. So the first one is limited liability. What does it mean? It means that a corporation is a separate legal entity and it exists apart from its shareholders and those who operate the business as directors or officers. This means that, as a general rule, the shareholders of a corporation, their directors and officers, are not going to be responsible for the corporation's debts in front of creditors. So probably this is one of the most important advantages of incorporations. The second one is defined and transferable ownership. This means that equity or ownership of the business can be issued as a general rule freely to new shareholders, including in exchange for investment, for example. So this is attractive to investors because you have the opportunity with a corporation of issuing new shares and allowing investors to come and participate as shareholders of the company. The third benefit is going to be taxes. This is because corporations are taxed separately from their owners. And because the corporate tax rate is generally
Sorry, Maria, I cannot hear you.
The next benefit is raising capital. Why? Because through a corporation, as I mentioned before, you can encourage investors to give you money in exchange of equity, in exchange of a percentage of ownership in the corporation. This is an additional incentive. And the last benefit, as my colleague already mentioned, is grants and funds. When this is a better access to grants and funds, when you incorporate, you can have access to both federal and provincial grants. Unfortunately, during this presentation, I'm not going to touch on the topic of grants, but I do want you to consider and be aware that you can access grants after you incorporate. If we go to the next slide, we'll go to the main question probably, and we get this question quite often from potential clients, and it's where to incorporate. What should I do? I know that I want to move to Canada. I know that I want to incorporate either a new business or a subsidiary of my foreign company. Where should I incorporate? What do I do? And why? Because in Canada, you can either incorporate at a federal level or at a provincial level, because each province will have their own legislation. If you try to incorporate at a federal level or in Ontario, there's going to be this legal requirement, and you need to have a Canadian director or a resident Canadian director as part of the board of directors. So what happens if you don't, let's say you come to Canada and you don't know anyone in here, so you're not going to have a Canadian director. That means that you won't be able to incorporate either federally or in Ontario. What do? There are many provinces, there are actually 8 provinces that don't have this residency requirement. including British Columbia. So what we offer to our clients is the option to incorporate in British Columbia a different province that doesn't have this legal requirement of the Canadian director. And in that way, they can incorporate in Canada, and they are not, the board of directors can be composed only of foreign directors. That is one option. Now, considering, let's say you have the Canadian director, it is still important to factor in where you plan on doing business when you try to incorporate. In theory, if you have a Canadian director, it is still preferable to incorporate at a federal level than in Ontario. And why? Because you can easily register to do business in multiple provinces. What does it mean to do business? Doing business is defined differently in each province, but we typically tell our clients that if you're establishing a location, an office in Ontario, for example, if you're hiring employees in Ontario, if you're advertising in Toronto, then you are operating and you're doing business in Ontario, and therefore you need to register your federal corporation in Ontario. That would be the same case if, let's say, I have a federal corporation and I'm hiring employees from British Columbia, but my offices are located in Ontario. What do? That means that you can register in both provinces, you can register to operate. Why is that important? Because if you incorporate at a provincial level, let's say you incorporate in Ontario and you want to expand your business and you want to hire employees from British Columbia, now more so, now that we're all working remotely, what do? Then if you have an Ontario company, it's going to be a little bit more costly to do business in different provinces because you need to extra provincially register in different provinces, which is an extra fee. So that's one of the main considerations that we tell our clients they need to be aware before incorporating. So the first question will be, where to incorporate? Do you have a Canadian director or do you have a Canadian resident that can be part of the board of directors? If yes, great. You can either incorporate at a federal level or in Ontario. What's the next question? Where do you plan on doing business? Where is your company going to operate? If it'll operate only in Ontario and you've got no plans of expanding your business, for example, fine, let's incorporate in Ontario. There are also advantages of incorporating in a province, in Ontario specifically. So for example, you're not gonna have to pay for an annual return or specific corporate requirements that are, not enforced here in Ontario. But if you plan to operate in different provinces, and we get this a lot with tech companies that, are going to hire people remotely, plan to have their clientele based all throughout Canada, then we do suggest to incorporate federally if possible. If not possible, because you don't have the Canadian director, then of course there is the option to incorporate in British Columbia. How do we do this? We prepare all the documents similarly as we would prepare for a federal or Ontario corporation. We incorporate in British Columbia, but we do need to consider that in order to incorporate in British Columbia, we need an address in British Columbia. So what do? If your office is actually going to be located in Ontario and not in British Columbia? What we can do is, and one of the solutions is to hire a virtual office. So the virtual office system allows you to have an address in British Columbia, and that address can be used as the registered address of your company. You can receive mail to that address. We can ask them, the virtual office company, we can ask them to scan the documents to your company located in Ontario. And in that way, we can incorporate in British Columbia while we still operate in Ontario. We, of course, need to register to be able to operate in Ontario. So that those are the options that are out there for you in order when it comes to incorporating your business. I don't know if you have any questions about this slide. This is the moment. You can just write them through the chat. Feel free to,
Open the
speak up.
microphone as well.
Yeah, Miriam can open the microphone.
Yeah. So if somebody has questions, please go ahead and ask your questions now. In the meantime, while you're preparing maybe to say something here, I wanted to ask Maria or Tatiani, do you have helped different type of companies through our programs? What is the biggest mistake you can see that they have done through incorporation process, or request that maybe is not let's say possible for Canadian companies? Can you share something about that?
I don't know if it's a mistake, but from my experience, and during COVID especially, companies that incorporate here in Canada, after incorporation, you need to open a bank account. And that has been an issue for most international companies. Why? Because there are so many travel restrictions right now. And in Canada, we need a person to go in person to the bank and open a bank account. So we've had issues where, foreign companies, the shareholders, the owners can't come to Canada to open the bank account. So I think that we try to tell them in advance, this is not something we offer because we just prepare all the documents, we incorporate the business, but we don't open bank accounts on behalf of clients. So this is something that you need to consider. Let's say you have someone here in Canada to be able to open the bank account for you. Great, let us know. We can appoint that person as an officer, and I'll explain right now who are the officers, who are the directors, but we can appoint that person as an officer, and that person can go with the incorporation documents to the bank and open a bank account. I do know that some banks are trying to move to a virtual system for opening bank accounts just because this is happening and the travel restrictions are going to continue throughout 2021. But I wouldn't say that's a mistake, but that's an issue we do need to consider.
Yeah. Now, in regards of the board of directors, many people sometimes is afraid that that adding a person that is already in Canada, they may have to take a percent over the company. How the board of directors work, so people understand, what is the implication for adding a person in board of directors? Do they have to buy shares for of the company? Be a part of the company in some way, like how that works?
Yeah, this is a great question, and this brings me to this next slide, that is organizing the corporation. The first thing we need to understand is the definitions of directors, officers, and shareholders. Why? Because there is a lot of confusion here with our clients. So who are the directors? The directors are the people, the persons that oversee the officers at the company. So they are the responsible for supervising the activities of the corporation and for making decisions regarding those activities. So let's say the directors are here. They are the responsible for the conduct of the business of the corporation. The directors that handle the corporation appoint officers. The officers are people that are appointed to a particular office. So let's say the president, the vice president, the secretary, the CEO, the CFO. The officers are the day-to-day managers of the corporation, and they report back to the directors. And who are the shareholders? The shareholders are let's say, the owners of the corporation. So the shareholders are people who own shares in the corporation, and those shares carry most likely voting rights, and they exercise control over through those voting rights. So the shareholders, it's a circle. The shareholders will appoint the directors. The directors are on top of the corporation, just overseeing how the officers are managing the corporation. The directors appoint the officers, and the officers take care of the day-to-day management of the corporation. So what happens here? If a person, it's only one person that wants to incorporate, then that person can easily be the sole shareholder, the sole director, and the sole officer. So that person can own the company, be the director, and be the president, vice president, and secretary, let's say. This is confusing because in a lot of Latin American countries, for example, only one person is not allowed to open a company, and that's why you need more persons, and then it gets confusing, right? But in Canada, one person can be everything, can fulfill all the roles. But that doesn't mean that one person has to fulfill all the roles, must fulfill all the roles. That doesn't mean that if someone becomes a director, it immediately becomes a shareholder and an officer as well. No, these roles are separate from each other, and the functions are different from each other. So let's say you need to appoint a director because you want to incorporate federally and you need a Canadian director. And you have a friend in Canada, but you don't really want that friend to have control over the company. What do? Probably you can appoint that person as a director to fulfill with this legal requirement, and you don't need to issue shares to that person, meaning that person is not going to become a partial owner of the corporation if you don't issue any shares to them. So that's an option. And also, we tell our clients that, of course, they need to consider that maybe you're appointing a director right now, but the shareholders are the ones that elect directors. So in the next annual meeting, you can easily not elect that director anymore. And that person can step down as being part of the board of directors. So hopefully that was clear, but let me know if you have any questions.
At least it was clear for me what is the board of directors, but I'm not sure if somebody in the audience has any questions about that part.
Yeah, feel free to speak up or write in the chat and we'll be answering questions.
I think probably they are clear at this point. So okay. Was a good explanation. Thank you.
No problem. So that is phase one when you try to organize a corporation. Phase one is just understanding everybody's roles, who are directors, who are officers, and who are shareholders. Let's go to the previous slide for a second. Phase two is in connection with contracts. So what happens next? I incorporated, everything's looking great. Now I want to hire employees or a developer, an independent contractor. What do? And I know that a lot of you are Latin American. I am too. So this is a cultural difference in Latin America where we're used to, rely on each other's word, and we're not used to, sign contracts that often because it's not that necessary. But in Canada, it's a different mindset. It's a different culture, and contracts are extremely important. So we highly suggest our clients that if they're going to hire someone to work with them, they need to draft an employment agreement. They definitely need to sign an independent contractor agreement. And these documents are not only going to rule the relationship with employee, but it's also going to protect the corporation's intellectual property, for example. So in that agreement, you can write down that if an employee develops intellectual property while working for the company, that intellectual property is the company's intellectual property, not the employee's. So that's an extremely important reason of why we need to set up agreements, employment agreements. What other agreements are necessary? And obviously, after incorporation, we walk our clients through this question. Okay, are you going to have two or more shareholders in the company? If so, you might want to consider drafting a shareholders agreement. Why? Because even if this is your best friend, even if this is your sister, your brother, there can be some conflicts in the future. And how are you going to resolve them? Are you going to reach an agreement in the future if you don't have a written down document to rely on? So the shareholders agreement basically sets up all the circumstances and the relationship between the shareholders, right? So what is going to happen if a shareholder dies? What to do with if a shareholder divorces from their spouse? What can the board decide, the board of directors? What can the shareholders decide as owners of the corporation? So that's another agreement that you need to consider after you incorporate. And the phase 3 is raising capital. After you incorporate it, you have all your agreements in place, you started operating your business, you see that is working out, is pretty successful in the Canadian market, and now you want to scale up. What do? How do you raise funds? There's one option: you can access grants and funds from the federal government or the provincial government, so you can apply for those, of course. And the other option is you can get investment from third parties. So let's say you go to a roadshow and you promote your corporation, and some people are interested in investing in your corporation in exchange of shares. So you need to consider that. And why this is an early on consideration is because when we're incorporating, we're structuring the company and the issuance of shares. And if you anticipate investments in a short-term future, for example, then you should consider issuing a larger amount of shares. So for example, if it's going to be a very small business, a family business, a restaurant, husband and wife are going to operate it, it's okay to issue 100 shares, 50 for the husband, 50 for the wife, that's fine. But if you anticipate investment, probably we can think about issuing 1 million shares, knowing that in the future, you're going to get investors. They are going to want some shares, let's say 10% in the company, and then you can issue those shares to them. And it's easier to do it if you have a larger share number. You could also think at this point in time whether you want to issue different classes of shares. So for example, you can issue your usual, if it's a very small family business, you can issue common shares, and that's enough. Common shares have attached the right to vote, the right to receive dividends if dividends are declared by the board of directors, and the right to receive all the assets after dissolution and winding up of the corporation. But what if you say, okay, I anticipate investors coming in a year or two, but honestly, I know that they want shares, but I don't really want them to be able to vote or to elect directors or to decide, to make decisions on behalf of the company. What do? That's okay. We can think about issuing a different class of shares, preferred shares, or common shares that don't have the option, don't have voting rights, for example. So I know that this is a lot of information, and I'm just giving you a bunch of pieces, but these are things you need to start considering when organizing the corporation, when incorporating, right at the beginning, think, do I anticipate investments? Am I hiring people? How am I going to operate the business? Just make these questions to yourself and you'll have a more clear picture. And if you go to a lawyer, if you come to us and you tell us, okay, I definitely anticipate investment, this is going to be a profitable business. I am going to hire persons. I'm going to require a shareholders agreement. It's going to be way easier for the lawyer. It's going to be way easier for us to guide you through the specific requirements, and to draft something that is customized specifically for you, that is tailored for your business and your needs. And if we go to the last slide, these are just some considerations for tech companies. We know that a lot of you are operating a business in the technology sector, or are trying to create an app, are trying to create a specific website platform. So for those of you, there are some additional contracts that you may take into consideration when trying to organize your corporation, such as privacy policies, terms of use, licensing agreements, services agreements. And all of those are, of course, they all have details and they all have their own specific requirements. So we can talk about those if you're in need of those. But we just want to leave this information with you, and just so you can start considering and you can start thinking about how you want to structure your business. What are your needs going to look like when you come to Canada? Because we know that incorporating a business in Canada it might seem easy, but it's not easy and can be confusing. So we're here to help. If you have any questions at this point, let us know. If not, we'll share this presentation.
Yeah, I have a question here from Maria Monteja. Is the corporation the most flexible legal structure available? In Chile, we have a type of company that is similar to a corporation, but allows for only one shareholder instead of minimum of two for corporations, and it has this lighter management structure, a general manager instead of board of directors.
Yeah. So as my colleague Tiziani was explaining earlier, in South America, there are many types of corporations, right? You have oh my gosh, responsabilidad limitada.
Company, yeah.
Thank you. Responsabilidad limitada, sociedad anónima. I forgot in Spanish for a second. But in Canada, it's way easier, at least federally and in Ontario. You've only have one type of company, and that's the corporation. Then, of course, you have sole proprietorship, you have partnerships, but those are different ones because those don't necessarily have the qualities of a corporation. I don't know if T wants to add something.
Yeah, I think for those of you who are from Latin America, the most similar form here to the corporation would be the Sociedad Anónima, or like an anonymous society. I don't know how to translate that, but it's the one that is the most similar here. But it doesn't mean that it's as complicated as it is for the incorporation process as it is in Latin America.
I'll just add one more thing, Miriam. You mentioned, I don't know who asked the question, but whoever mentioned it, I think assumed that you require more than one shareholder. That's not true. In Canada, you can have one shareholder that owns all the shares of a corporation. So just wanted to make sure that part was clear as well. I think the only thing that Maria Sue was saying in her part of the discussion was that there's different hats that an individual can wear. That when you have a small, closely held company, the same person can be the owner and can also be the director and can also be an officer of the business. And each of those are different roles, and they can be performed by different people. Or you could have different people performing the roles of officers and directors than the owners of the business, but it doesn't have to be. So just to be clear, one person can own a corporation. Or can be the sole shareholder of a corporation in Canada. I just want to make sure that part's clear.
There is also the timeline to create a corporation. Once you have all the paperwork, I think it's pretty much fast, right? When you guys have analyzed all the paperwork and everything.
Yeah.
Incorporate online, I mean.
Yeah, it's fairly easy. The incorporation part is pretty easy, but after incorporating, we need to create the minute book. In Spanish, it's libros sociales, so the record books of the company. And yeah, the incorporation process should take around 2 weeks. It's pretty fast. I know that in Latin America, it takes a longer time to prepare the documents, get approval, then you need to send them back again. But in Canada, it's a fairly easy process.
And it is accepted for you to use electronic signatures, so there's no need for you to be presently here to start the incorporation process. You can use electronic signatures. The only thing, like Maria Sue mentioned before, is the opening of the bank account that may generate the need for the bank to verify your identity. But other than that, you can do everything remotely.
Yeah, and I have another question. I don't know if somebody else in the audience, but before when we have this session with Blaine, it seems like the audience was, they were basically asking questions about a startup visa program and intercompany transfer. And for those two type of immigration process, I guess the incorporation of the company may be sensitive. So we know that for a startup visa program, you require to have a certain percent of the company here in Canada. For intercompany transfer, do you have a different type of a structure for the company, or what will be the requirements for that specific type of visa?
The main difference from startup visa and intercompany transfer is that for startup visa, the shareholders or the owners of the Canadian company need to be the actual applicants for the visa. So you need to have, for example, if you have 3 founders of your foreign entity or 3 founders in the Canadian entity for startup visa, those are the ones that need to be applying for the program, and they need to be registered as shareholders, and they have to have a minimum percentage of shares. I don't know if you discussed this before during the immigration session. We were not here, sorry. But essentially, each of them need to have at least 10% of the shares of the company, and all of them together need to have 50% or more of the shares of the company. When you talk about intercompany transfer, the idea is that you have a foreign company and you have a company that has been established in Canada, and that company wants to move someone here, and for that reason you need a work permit to start operating here. So in that case, when we structure the Canadian company, it needs to be controlled by the foreign company and not by the individuals who are the shareholders of that company. So it's very important. Yeah.
Common ownership, from what we understand.
Yeah.
Either common ownership with the foreign entity, or it's literally a controlled, like, kind of subsidiary of that foreign.
So it's very important for us to know, if you plan to apply for a startup visa, for us to keep that in mind and not do the ordinary thing, which would be to have the foreign company being the sole shareholder of the Canadian entity.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if somebody else has questions at this point, but we are about to finish this conversation here with OzielLaw. This video for sure is going to be shared with all of you. Now, Alan or Maria or Tassiani, how can people can reach you out in case they have questions about how to incorporate their companies?
I think the best way, honestly, is to visit our website. We actually have specific pages dedicated to startups generally, but also another specific page dedicated to the startup visa program. So you can find really visual and informative content that can really walk you through the requirements for the startup visa program, and then the requirements generally for incorporation. And each of those pages has a contact form that is that we know is specifically coming from that page. And we've built out a whole process where, we'd be very happy to respond to you and set up a chat to discuss your needs. So I think that's probably the best way. Or of course, you have our information right here in the presentation. My email address, Tassian's and Maria Sue's email addresses are right here as well. So you can also email us to set up a time to chat.
Yeah, it's important also to say that Maria speaks Spanish and Tassiani Portuguese, for those that maybe want to, ask questions in maybe Spanish or Portuguese.
Yeah, and it's also important to mention that I understand Spanish, but we'll speak back to you in English.
That's true. Okay, thank you so much, Alan and Maria and Tassiani, again, for your big help with this presentation and understanding how to incorporate in Canada. I think it was extremely clear what people can do in order to have a company here in Canada. And thank you to the audience to be here today. We are going to pass this video. If there is no other questions, then we're going to finish here, and I'll see you in about an hour in the angel investment session. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you,
See
Miriam.
you.